Well, a very warm welcome to you all. Thank you so much for being here this evening. My name is Laura Gilchrist, and I'm based in Manchester in the UK. And I live here with my husband, Ben, and our 2 children. And I've been involved in Common Change in my local area I think pretty much since it first started here in the UK. So I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting this evening. I am a coach, mediator and facilitator by background, so this is one of the things I love to do, so thank you for the invitation to do that. I know that some of you are old timers with Common Change and some of you are quite new to it. So for those of you who are quite new to Common Change UK is one of the only collective giving platforms in the UK, and the way that it works is that people in a particular area, a particular locality come together and pool their giving in order to give to others in need within their community. And what we want to do this evening, and what we're hoping will happen this evening, is to give you a real flavour of what that looks like in practice, of the kind of impact that Common Change can have from what are actually quite small groups of people just coming together to pool their giving and their finances in that way. We are recording the event so that, we know that there were some people who really wanted to be here but couldn't make this particular time. So we're going to be recording the event. If you're able to have your camera on and join us, that's great. If you are not able to do that because you're multitasking, driving or doing something else, that's also fine. But just to let you know that the event's being recorded. We're also intending that there'll be a space for questions at the end. So the format of this evening is going to be that we've got a wonderful special guest who I will introduce in just one moment. And we've got some stories for you. We've got 4 sets of stories which will really bring to life the kind of feel and flavour of Common Change and what it looks like on the ground. And if you, as people are talking, if you have any questions that are coming up for you, please do pop them into the chat. And my lovely assistant, Fiona, can you give us a wave? We'll be tracking those questions, and towards the end of the session, there'll be an opportunity for, maybe a couple of you, 2 or 3 of you to come on and ask those questions directly. So we're going to do it that way round. We're together for the next 90 minutes until 9 o'clock. And yeah, it's wonderful to be here with you. Now, without further ado, I want to extend a really, really warm welcome to our special guest this evening, who is joining us all the way from Philadelphia in the US. Shane Claiborne, welcome. It's wonderful to have you with us. For those of you who don't know Shane, how? No, but for those of you that don't know Shane, Shane is an activist, a renowned speaker, a best-selling author, and he founded the Simple Way community, and he spends a lot of his time advocating for grace. And he also heads up Red Letter Christians. It's fantastic to have you with us, Shane. Thank you for being here and making the time in what I know is a busy schedule.
Well, thank you, Laura. Yeah, thanks for everybody. It's wonderful to see the faces on my screen and the ones that I can't see, where we feel your love. And I'm so excited to be a part of this event tonight. In some ways, we stumbled into this vision together, and in a lot of ways, it's 2,000 years old because the original inspiration of this really came from the early church. And for folks who haven't, read that birth story of the early Christians in the book of Acts, it says that they shared everything that they owned. No one claimed any of their possessions were their own, but they shared what they had. It even says that the offerings were put at the feet of the apostles, and it was distributed to folks as they had need. And it goes on to say that there were no needy persons among them. That one of the signs of the birth of the church was this beautiful, concrete community of sharing resources with each other. It wasn't just the fire of the Holy Spirit and the speaking in tongues. I mean, that was all wonderful, but it was this really beautiful way of sharing relationally with each other. So that's the backdrop. Now you fast forward, to in our own era, my friend Darren Peterson and I were working. We found ourselves at a mega church outside of Chicago, and there were many beautiful parts of that shaped us. But one of the things we began to see is how much possibility there is for the resources that we have, not just in the mega church, but if we really figure out creative ways of sharing with each other all the good that we could do. And that was sort of spawned by a wonderful thinker in the UK, actually, Ray Mayhew, who wrote a paper called, well, this is what he did. He looked at the offerings of the church, the tithes and offerings, and saw how few of them, how little of that actually goes to meet needs and goes directly into relationships in our community. Most of it, depending on the denomination, between 90% and even 95% of most denominational offerings that are given on Sunday morning, 95% of that stays to maintain buildings and staffing, which, we can argue that a lot of that exists for beyond itself missionally in our communities, but we really saw that as a a little bit of a holding up a mirror to the church and going, can't we do better than that? Because this idea of sharing was not just a budget item for the early church, but it was the budget. It was what they were doing with their offerings. And so Ray's paper, his original paper, I think, was entitled "Embezzlement: The Sin of the Contemporary Church." Didn't mince words much, but so what we did was we really felt like let's get the log out of our own eye, right? Let's not just look at how out of whack the budgets of the mega church are, but let's try something new. Mm-hmm. And this was very much an experiment, and we originally called it the relational tithe because we were giving 10% of our money together, and 100% of that, all of that was being shared in a real communal, consensus-based way of discerning. Some gifts of 150 we discern different from, $5,000 gifts, but it was meant to be this exact way the early church did it. We pull our money together and we give it, not to any organizations or we've never really been giving to people we read about newsletters, but it's literally meant to be distributed to folks that we're in relationship with, kind of pushing us to be in relationship to people who struggle economically and to see that we're brothers and sisters together. We're meant to bear each other's burdens. And so, over the last 20 years or so, we have seen all kinds of beautiful things happen. I mean, I don't know exactly how long it is. I'm getting old, Laura. I'm turning 47 soon. But anyway, it's been definitely over 10 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars that we shared. But just to, show you how concrete that is, I don't know if y'all can see this, but outside my window is my little community here, in the north side of Philadelphia. And there's a rich community we've been building for 25 years, but economics are a struggle. I mean, we've had 100,000 jobs leave our neighborhood, 700 abandoned factories. And so economics is hard. So like this pool became a way that we can help each other out. So when our corner store was robbed at gunpoint, we were able to replenish part of what they really the finances that they lost in that robbery. One of my neighbor's cars was vandalized. We were able to fix it up. And beyond the emergency stuff, we've helped kids go to college. We've gotten people dentures. We've paid for funerals. We've created some jobs. And all of that is for people that we're doing life with. So that's kind of how this thing came about. And it's so incredible to see where it's going, to see unique expressions happening there in the UK. So I told Laura and want to tell all of you, I'm here to listen and to celebrate with you some of that new vision. So that's just a little bit of the backdrop of where it came from.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Shane. It's so inspiring. And you know what really struck me from that story that you shared just about the needs in your local area is how you see a need, you see something going on in your local area, and that awful example of the corner shop being robbed at gunpoint, and you're like, I want to do something about it, but one person on their own, it's tough, it's too much. But when we pool resources and come together to do that, there's a power in that, isn't there? And I just love that. And you really walk this talk. This is not the first time we've met, and you probably won't remember this, but in something in the noughties, I think it was 2006, 2007, you did a talk at the Greenbelt Festival, and I was there with some friends afterwards. I don't know what year it was, but we went to the pizza stand, and it was a festival, and they're like, sorry folks, we've run out, and we were like, oh, we'll have to find somewhere else. So we came out of the stand, and who's there but you are with your pizza. You've got your pizza, and you're like, yeah, come and share my pizza with me. So that's my memory of
I love it.
I love the way that you walk this talk as well, and I think it feels like there's a living, breathing sense of, what's mine is yours, really. And if there's people listening to this who are like, well, isn't that what charity giving is for? How do you see Common Change as unique and distinct from that piece?
Well, I think there's lots of different ways to give, and Lord knows that we need to be as generous as we can. So I'm not going to knock anybody's generosity, but I think what is really unique about Common Change is that we are creating community, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not just about an exchange of resources, but it's about not feeling alone in the world. It's about creating a space of belonging, a sense of we're in this together, and you've got some burdens that you shouldn't be bearing on your own. And that's part of the good news of the gospel, is that we've got each other. And it's not just the resources. I think it's walking with people through these life experiences. And that's what we're doing too. You'll see something, sometimes there'll be a request that comes up of, someone needs a car, and someone will say, well, I don't exactly have a car, but I've got time to run them back and forth to work while we figure it out, and so there's just this kind of sense of coming together that is just as important as the resources. And sometimes you miss that in a large charitable giving. You write a check, you don't exactly know where it goes or how much is going to infrastructure and all that. But what we're doing is really trying to create that sense of, we're not alone. And part of this too is exactly what you said, Laura. We can do more together than on our own. If we all just try to do this, then there's sometimes things that we encounter, and we're wiser together, we're wealthier together, and not just in financial ways, but just as a community. So sometimes there's people that need more than finances, and we're able to say, hey, does somebody have a digital designer, because they got a new business startup and they need somebody doing that. So it's also about bringing all of our gifts together, not just finances.
Such an important point. Thank you for making that. And I think that certainly resonates with my experience in Old Trafford, where I live, that piece around knowing the people, or knowing of the people that you're able to give to, means that you can be more aware of what else might be going on in their lives. And look, we've got some great speakers, so why don't we hear from, I'm going to come first of all to Karen and Rob, who, so the format is going to be, I'm going to hand over to them just to tell us a bit about where you're calling in from, Karen and Rob, and what's your story, what's your situation with Common Change? We want to hear from you. Thanks for being here.
Hi, yeah, it's great to be here and to be part of this conversation this evening. So we're based in North Tyneside, just on the coast in North Shields. We run a Fresh Expression up there, been doing it for over 10 years. We've been struggling really for a lot of years, trying to work out how do we support, particularly people that are in our own community, our faith community, how do we do that well? And we were struggling to find ways to do that. And we tried all kinds of emergency call outs, that kind of thing. But it wasn't really doing the thing that we wanted it to do. So we were looking for something that was going to help us to do that. So we set up Common Change for Beachcorner of Ex about just over a year ago. We've given just over £2,000 over the course of the last 12 months that we've been going. And we've got 16 folks in our Common Change group. It's great, and I'm going to hand over to Karen, who's going to tell us a little about the story that we're going to share.
Yes, hi everybody. So the story we're going to share, we had a big storm in the northeast just before Christmas, I think. Storm Arwen, which is quite unusual for up here. There was quite a lot of damage to properties, and one of the issues you had in terms of that was insurance companies weren't paying out for storm damage. And it kind of sort of not long after Christmas, I ended up in a conversation with one of the people in our community they have 3 grown-up children. They would normally had 2 cars, but because of the storm damage and one of the car having to be written off, they were left in a position where they only had 1 car and lots of commuting to do and all sorts of things. And kind of part of their story was that they'd wiped their savings out repairing their home after the storm. So we kind of had a look and we were able to kind of club together with other people in our group, and everybody agreed really quickly, and we were able to give them £750 from our common change, which enabled them to kind of buy a car and put some money towards a car, and they're now in a position where they've got 2 again, and they're able to kind of deal with all their grown-up children and different commuting. But what's been great is that we keep increasing the number of people who are in our group, and John and Claire, who we gave that £750 to, are now part of the group that give regularly. So after wiping out nearly everything for that, and then we gave to a Ukrainian family as well, we're now in a position where we're building up funds again. We've got just over £500, so we're now in a position where we can start giving out again. But yeah, it's been amazing in terms of building relationships, and kind of it's a real at the core of what we're about.
That's such an incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing that. Just one quick question about that example that you shared. How did you know about that need within your community? What was the connection with them relationally?
They had joined our community maybe during COVID. We continued to meet virtually during COVID, and they kind of, because they're a little bit further away, they joined us on Zoom, and we kind of started to get to know them again once we were able to go back into the pub, because we meet in a pub. And it was like a conversation one Sunday night at the end of our regular meeting, kind of just saying, we're having a nightmare with cars. And at that point, they they weren't that aware of what Common Change was, and that we had that pot of money. So it was kind of like, in that conversation, I kind of came home and I said to Rob, we need to maybe look at how we can meet this need for them.
Fantastic. And when you say your community, was that your local area community or your church community that was meeting in a pub, or was it, was it your Common Change community? What was the sort of context of that?
It's one of the things that we struggled with before was trying to find a way to support people that were in our local faith community, as well as those who are one step removed. Yeah. So for us, Common Change, after lots of great conversations with Matt, who was really helpful, I have to say, trying to explore how we might explore that a little bit, because we didn't want to just do it for people that were one step removed. We wanted to do it for people within our own context who were struggling, because we've got a few over the last 12 months that have fallen on really difficult times, job stuff and all health issues, that we wanted to support them as well. So John and Claire were part of our community, but as I say, they're not the only ones that we've given our finances to over the course of the 12 months that we've been active.
Of course, yeah. Thank you so much. And that your group's only been going just a year then, so yeah. Still really quite young.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. If any of you have got any questions for Karen and Rob, please do pop them into the chat, and we'll come back to those towards the end of the session. Thank you both. What I really loved about Karen and Rob's story there was the way that, that couple that they gave to, I think you said they were called John and Claire, who needed that second car, then, responded by getting involved in Common Change. It had this kind of domino knock-on effect. And I just wanted to come back to you, Shane, and ask, in your experience, is that a sort of common feature of the way that these things tend to work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's not a prototype, and that's part of what's really awesome. It leaves room for the spirit. It leaves room for a lot of people to bring their gifts. And some people have financial resources and some people have other resources. But I think that was a really powerful story of what we're able to do together, and it's often after these crises that, if you are getting public assistance from the government or other entities, that can take some time. So it's amazing just to feel like that sense of there's someone with you right after that, helping, along the way. So, yeah, thank you, Rob and Karen, so much for sharing.
And it was such a great example of how one event, like one storm, has this cascade of effects often for people, doesn't it? It's not just like your roof's gone, your roof's gone, so then you use all your savings on that if you're lucky enough to have savings, and then that money isn't available when the car breaks, and it can be a bit of a cycle for people. And sometimes it is just a matter of a few £100 or dollars in your case that they need just to tide them over. Yeah.
And a lot of these stories, I mean, we're all in different positions. We're born into different degrees of privilege. And some people have folks that can a support structure when there is a crisis, like a storm or something, a fire that happens. But other folks that we've got to build that together with them, I think that's what we've seen is that sense of being together in these crises is what it's all about. And there's so many different ways that people get hit. We've got a friend right now that's was wrongfully convicted and spent 20 years in prison for a crime he didn't do. And he's coming out, and that doesn't just affect his finances, it affects his social network. It affects so many different things, technology, how he's able to use and access technology. He spent 20 years in jail. So all of this is about trying to step in and where the system and where incidents or natural disasters or whatever can really devastate someone's life and change the whole trajectory of their future.
Well, that was a lovely segue into our next story, which I'm going to hand over to Fiona. Fiona, do you want to just tell us where you're dialing in from and what's your story?
Hi, I'm dialing in from Manchester, Old Trafford, and I am telling a story about refugee need in our community. We have a friend who often works alongside refugee needs with people coming into our community who are under-resourced and obviously need supplies. And she came to me with a story of two women who had joined our community and were experienced seamstresses. So they were hoping to start their own business, and they had already very generously been given sewing machines by other people in the community, but they still needed ironing boards and irons. And I had just started a local Common Change group. So it was very new, it was in its infancy, and we had very limited funds, but I really wanted to help. So I put on my thinking cap, and I started my own group off the back of being in another group in the community. So Old Trafford Common Change, I was originally a part of, and I decided to go back to them. And I said, hi guys, I have this need and I don't quite have the finances to fulfill it. Can you help me? And they were like, sure, of course. So we met the need as two groups, which was what I thought was really kind of speaks to what makes Common Change so great, is that it's about collective, kind of addressing something collectively, never on your own. And I really loved that aspect about being able to meet, come to my friend and say, hey, I thought we couldn't do it, but actually we can. And I think that's partly why I really kind of felt drawn to start a group of my own, because I feel like Common Change puts the power back in the people's hands, to see a need, to address it, and to meet it, however they can find those resources.
Thank you so much, Fiona. And I'm part of that group that you mentioned, and it was it was such a creative way for you to look at meeting that need. And I think, you know, what's really interesting to me in that is that there may be people watching this who are slightly tempted or interested in setting up their own group, but there's that sense of, oh, big responsibility. What if I can't get the funds together? What if it's, you know, what if it's doesn't work or what have you? But I just want to say that you're someone who's done it, you know, who's seen it work. It's, you know, it's like multiplied into a new group. So instead of getting one big group, we've got a couple of groups within Old Trafford itself, which is not a huge area, let's face it.
Yes.
And I just want to encourage, if there is anyone that's watching this who's kind of thinking about that as a possibility, just go for it. Don't be afraid to do it, because, you know, that kind of little fear in the head that there might not be enough or it might not work, there's always enough. And Fiona is also our coordinator for the UK, so she's also available to support people, and we'll say a bit more about that at the end. But thank you so much for that story, Fiona.
Of course.
Yeah, that's great. And we're going to come to Phil. Have we got Phil now with us? Phil, hello. Hi.
Hi, everyone.
Tell us where you're calling in from and a bit about your story, please.
Well, I'm actually just up the road from Laura and Fiona as well. I'm in Manchester in a park called Stretford, which is really probably only 2 or 3 miles from Old Trafford. So we're close neighbours, and we've got a small common change group here as well. So we've probably been going 2-3 years, I think. And we've done a number of different things through the group, through the pot of money that we've pulled together. Some of it's been around helping families with individual needs. So we've had examples. Often what it is people that we're in contact with through different sort of outreach type activities that our church groups involved with here in Stretford. And so we've had families who haven't been able to afford to buy Christmas presents for their kids, and we've supported with that. We've had a couple of families that we've supported because they were really struggling to the extent of not being able to afford food to put on the table. So we've contributed sort of vouchers for them to buy food. A really recent example is a family that's struggling now with the fuel bills, gas and electricity prices that have gone massively up in recent times. So we've used our pot to meet some individual needs. But there was another thing that we did which was a little bit different. Around this time last year, actually, we have a very good friend who's part of our church who runs a local charity, and one of the things that she's been doing is providing hot meals for families on free school meals during school holidays when then the kids aren't getting the meals in schools. And alongside that initiative, she wanted to work with the local community in the area that she was providing for and where we're based, to sort of see what other needs they had and what they wanted to see happen in the community. So she gathered a bunch of local parents, and one of the things they said was, so this was summer holidays last year, we'd really like to have a sports day for our kids because of it still being COVID pandemic and stuff. They hadn't had a sports day in their school. So our friend Elizabeth got together and we helped. A bunch of us volunteered and we put on a sports day. And then later in August, the other idea was to throw a street party just for the local residents. And so it was just, this is a little area that often Elizabeth says, and I kind of agree with her, it's a bit of a forgotten area that doesn't really get talked about when, you know, the council are talking about Stretford and its needs. And so we just, I mean, it was not a massive thing. There was probably 40-50 people here, but we had a DJ, we had an ice cream van came, and our Common Change Pot just basically came alongside her initiative and the initiative of the families in the community, and just helped out with some of the costs of that, some of the food that was going to be laid out. And it was just a really fun afternoon, and it was really nice to come in and support an initiative that had kind of been generated out of the local community, where people were saying, this is what we really like to see for our local community, and we could just come in and make a contribution. We weren't the only people contributing to it, but that was a really nice, really enjoyable thing to do.
That's so fantastic, Phil. And you know what really strikes me about that story is the community component of it. And I think, you know, we've had such a difficult time over the past couple of years, actually having spaces where people can, it's not just about those financial needs, and those are huge and only increasing as the cost, as you said rightly, the cost of living goes up so rapidly. But there's also been a real need to come back together, hasn't there, and build those connections, and particularly for our children. So what a fantastic thing to have done. I'm curious as to whether you've got anything planned. Was that last year that you did that, or was that a this year thing?
That was 2021. I think we tend to be a bit lastminute.com with everything we're doing, but I think that Elizabeth is going to have fairly similar events going on this summer as well, this August. So yeah, looking forward to getting involved again. Awesome. And whether we contribute financially or whether it's just a bunch of kind of people around our group that get involved and give time to that, I'm sure we'll be involved again.
Thank you so much. And I'm curious in terms of like the sense of the impact that this has within the community, because you sound, am I right in thinking you live in that sort of small neglected area that you spoke about?
Very close.
Or just right by it. Yeah. What's the impact that this work has? What do you see in terms of the ways that people maybe respond?
Well, I think one of the things I'd really highlight, and what I really loved in the way that Shane talked about it, was the fact that it's so relational, and that it's kind of the giving connects in with building relationship and getting to know people better, and it kind of becomes a self-reinforcing thing. So I guess the most recent fruit, which I don't know how directly it's linked, but we've been doing some kind of Sunday afternoon things where we invite people into like a really low key, we did like an afternoon tea, and there was like a 2-minute talk around a sort of gospel type theme. We had about 30 people just from those streets around where we were meeting just come in, and a lot of them had been involved in different ways with these things. So that I guess kind of just gives me a sense that relationships are being built and trust is being built and a sense of community is being built.
Yeah, so. Sounds like people, it's that know, like and trust thing, isn't it? They're getting to know you through some of the events that you've done, and they're like, these are people that I want to hang out with and spend time with. Totally. Thank you so much, Phil. Really appreciate that. Again, if you've got any questions for either Phil or Fiona, do pop them into the chat and we'll come to those at the end. I wanted to just bring you back in, Shane, if that's okay, and just anything that you particularly wanted to draw out from either of those stories, any of those stories that have been shared that feels significant to you?
Well, partly what's great is how different they are, you know, and I think it reminds me, as I think of what we've contributed to, they have been crisis response or an emergency, but they've also been just the opposite, just a celebration, sending someone on vacation that really needs a break, you know. And I think it's kind of an invitation to be creative, you know, like if you had endless resources, what would we be able to do together? And it's not endless, but it is like a sense that I can do things that I've always wanted to do and maybe haven't been able to do because we've got a bigger pool that we're coming from. So it's exactly the same thing that we set out doing years ago. And, you know, I think that some of the questions too around preserve, like I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit more, but, you know, how do we create jobs? And the example of the refugee families and the seamstress or tailoring micro business, that's exactly the kind of thing where you go, well, let's like seed fund something that might create a permanent income eventually for folks. So all of those, like everything I'm hearing is you know, so beautiful. And part of why it's beautiful is that there's not one cookie cutter thing that we do. It's everybody's kind of gifts and imagination and their relationships that we're building on. So yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. You've just reminded me of one of the needs that came up in our group. I can't remember how long ago it was now, but it was someone who had a job interview but had no suit and needed to be quite smart, and came, I think it was a friend who they'd been chatting to, and the friend said, oh well, let me put into Common Change. And I think in the end, I think actually someone lent them a suit, and that was, it didn't even go through the fund, but it was that capacity to just be really creative with it, which I find so exciting and so dynamic. It's
Absolutely.
not fixed, and for those that aren't yet part of Common Change groups, one of the things that I love is there's no hoops to jump. Well, people need to just write a paragraph. That is it. And if they're not able to do that, then someone could support them to do that. If there aren't targets, numbers, documents that are needed in order to reach into the pool, in order to access it. And at the same time, there's good checks and balances as well. And I think that's a really unique part of the setup.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's part of the dance. The bigger these infrastructures are, like for the government and for NGOs and nonprofits, sometimes it's just, there's a lot to wade through, especially to get $150 or whatever, or, a few pounds for a dress suit. It's just, how do you do that? There's not an ability to nuance or to kind of, just make it happen. And I think we've been figuring that out for a while, but the right equilibrium of the structure that's needed, right, to be responsible and accountable, but also to just go, let's do this together, so that, the decisions that we make, we trust our friendships and our relationships. So people might ask, have you thought of doing this? But if you say, I've known this person 10 years and I think this is the best way to support them right now, then we kind of trust that together. And so yeah, it's wonderful.
Well, I want to bring us to a slightly new element of Common Change now this evening, which is is something that has just emerged this year. And I'm not going to say too much about it because I'm going to actually just hand over to two of our guests this evening, Matt and Ags, who are going to share a bit about their story with Common Change. Matt, tell us a bit about where you're calling in from and what's happened for you this year with Common Change.
Thank you, Laura. And hi, everyone. Recognise a few folks on here. Nice to see you. So I'm in Tyneside, actually just around the corner from Rob and Karen. And our group's been going for 2 or 3 years. And I guess like everybody, when the war in Ukraine broke out in February, when the Russians invaded, we were all just really shocked by that and immediately wanted to do something. And, there was all sorts of appeals going. And I think, like many people, as a family, we wanted to immediately respond. And the Disasters Emergency Committee, they have their appeal. And that, I was convinced that was quite, a helpful and trustworthy route to get financial resources to pay for medical equipment and that sort of thing that would get immediately to the front line. But it was like 24, 48 hours before we started to see the refugee situation mounting up on the border to the neighbouring countries, to Poland and to Hungary and Moldova. And it was evident as well that people resident in those countries were opening their homes. Now, of course, we're not on their border. We're a long, long, long way away. And so you immediately start to think, well, who's going to be paying for the food and the heating bills and all that kind of thing? And do we know anybody in Eastern Europe that maybe we could help through our Common Change group? And I was talking to my wife about that, and we started WhatsApping with 1 or 2 friends. Maybe we could do something with this. Our fund had probably grown a little bit bigger than we like it to get. And so we knew we had a sort of money there that was burning a hole in our pocket. But we sensed also that probably we had a wider circle of friends who might want to be involved as well. But I thought the first thing I need to do is I need to sort of find out if anybody has taken in some refugees. And then I remembered my friend Ags, who actually lives in Manchester, but is originally from Poland, and her parents still live out there. And so I got in touch with Ags and said, can we talk? I'm sure your mum and dad are going to be somehow caught up in all this. And Ags, over to you. So remember that phone call that we had back in sort of late February?
Yes, I do remember. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Yes, I do remember, and it's amazing, really, how when we partner with God, what He can do. I came over to England in 1998, all the way from Poland, to do my studies. But my family, like you say, Matt, remain. And my dad has been a pastor of a Christian church in a small town in the northeast of Poland for most of his life. And in February, they found themselves, even though they weren't sort of, they're not directly sort of close to the border with Ukraine, but they found themselves sort of in the middle of really a town responding to this huge influx of refugees flooding into this town of 40,000 people. And my dad's church, my parents' church, you know, it's not a big church, it's about 40, 50 people attending. But they just found themselves with these Ukrainians on their doorstep, literally sort of asking for rooms, asking to be sort of housed and helped. And so the church sort of obviously kind of had to think very quickly on their feet. And they realized they have a retreat place which is used for camps and sort of conferences with a beautiful lake, beautiful grounds, and so they decided that they're going to open this retreat place to the refugees. So the chapel was turned into dorms housing about 100 people, and mostly moms and children, and the rest of the conference centre. So I think at the peak of response, there was 185 people suddenly living in this retreat place in a small town. And the church sort of found themselves actually coordinating this town's response to the refugee crisis. And sort of that's where I received a phone call from Matt and Grace, and you know, kind of felt in a really privileged position, kind of frustrated to have my family so far away, but actually really privileged that actually when things like that happen, God is a God of detail, far from our needs, and He moves us, you know, where we need to be for such a time as this. And so yeah, so we sort of talked, and you were asking how you can help, and so yeah, and then I spoke to my dad and kind of connected all of that together. So yeah, so Common Change were able to send funds over to Ostruda in Poland.
Yeah, it was amazing. And because it was around about the time as well that Fiona had joined us as our first ever member of staff for Common Change in the UK. So Fiona just works a couple of days a week, but was able to bring a little bit of extra capacity to solving it. So, you know, we discovered that there was a sort of a mechanism through the website that we'd never used before, where we could invite all the other Common Change groups and anybody else to participate as well. And so we just put a call out to say that we're going to be sending some money over to Poland. There's 180 odd refugees holed up in this sort of chapel and all the chalets that surround it. There's a lot of women and children. They need feeding. It's Poland, it's February, it's cold, you know, got to pay for all the heating bills, all that kind of thing. And so people just really responded. And so we actually, you know, our Common Change Fund had £1,000 in at the time that we could offer, but we trebled that by actually just putting a call out to the other groups, and people responded amazingly. So we were able to send support over, which was fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely invaluable support. And I know it's made a huge difference, to the church. I think it's hugely empowered and encouraged, that local congregation who have opened not just the retreat place, but also their homes. I know my parents have two sisters who came to live with them sort of at the end of February, and we don't know how long they will stay. They are 20 and 13, and their parents are involved. Their dad is on the front line training soldiers, and the mum is in HR in the Ukrainian army. So the girls are literally sheltered at my parents' house.
What an incredible response. And there's just such a strong theme here of relationships. The fact that just at that time, Matt, when that war was breaking out, you remembered Axe, and you're like, that's someone I could have a conversation with and talk to, and maybe her folks out there or some of her relatives are doing stuff, and lo and behold, of course they were. I'm curious, like, where things are at now. Like, is the need ongoing? What is the situation like now? Because we get some idea from the media and the news, but what's it like on the ground there in that village that your parents are in the retreat place, which I'm guessing is in a separate area to the actual village or the town?
No, it's still in the same town. It's just sort of across from my parents. But yeah, still an ongoing need. And obviously, when crisis emerges, it's sort of the urgent need, isn't it? But then it sort of, as life evolves, it becomes important and less urgent. And I know that retreat place have had to kind of go back to being a retreat place rather than a refugee place because of the camps that they host in the summer. So they've had to again think on their feet and construct sort of chalets and separate like home housing units for each family, so that no one was thrown out. The people who came and stayed are still there at the retreat place. Some have moved back. Some families have decided to go back to Ukraine, whether they were from the parts of Ukraine currently, not affected by the war. But it's sort of talking to my parents, it's really a beautiful thing how they've developed real sort of strong relationships with Ukrainians, as they call them, brothers and sisters. When I first was talking to my parents, I sort of said, how do you communicate? Because this is, Ukrainian is a different language completely, and you speak Polish. And my parents said, it's absolutely incredible because we speak Polish and they speak Ukrainian and we understand one another. And immediately I sort of thoughts of like Acts, when we read about how the disciples spoke in their language and actually people understood in their own tongues. That was kind of like God just kind of brought me to those stories. And I thought, oh my goodness, it's just absolutely incredible seeing these two women who came to sort of have supper with my parents, and they were having an absolute blast, talking and sort of these beautiful friendships emerged from that. And so I think as we moved into sort of ongoing needs for those families who return to Ukraine, I know that this summer they will be sending their children back to Poland to attend Christian camps. And so, just to be able to give the children that continuity of relationships, to give them that kind of ongoing, continuing sort of Christian discipling, nurturing relationships is just absolutely beautiful. And I know sort of my dad mentioned as well that they've made contact with a Ukrainian Christian charity based just outside Kiev. And my dad was telling me that once before the CEO of this organization, as she came to Poland with a big lorry, and the church was able to basically take him to big warehouse and fill this lorry with groceries, with supplies and all of those things of sort of needs. And he was able to take it back to Ukraine and give to the local communities for free. And my dad was saying, you know, they went to this warehouse, sort of like a Costco thing. And this guy absolutely couldn't believe, because he was able to get salt, the most basic of ingredients. But unfortunately, in Ukraine, 2 of the 3 salt mines that supply the country with salt have been bombarded and are out of working. And so for Ukrainians, they just can't get any salt anywhere in the country. So my dad was sort of telling me yesterday how they managed to get 100 kilos of salt onto this lorry that went back to Ukraine, with this guy absolutely thrilled that, you know, they were able to take that back to the local communities. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Just the
Yeah.
simple things we take for granted. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So yes, so he's coming back with a lorry, with an empty lorry.
For some more salt.
For some more salt, yes, yes. And other things, bits and pieces. So yes.
Cool.
And if people are listening to this, you know, thinking, wow, because I think when we witnessed that stuff happening over there, and just there was that response that you've expressed, Matt, so well, of like, what can I do? How can I help here? And I think that's still there for us, many of us, isn't it? And you know, for us in the UK, just being that bit further away, how can people support this cause? Is this something they could give to directly, whether or not they're involved in a Common Change group, or is that helpful? You know, I don't want to assume that is what's needed. What is the support that's needed at this point, from your perspective, Ags, and maybe Matt?
Well, I think we're due to send another gift, really. So we were going to send another gift next week. I asked Fiona to prepare something for us. So if see this up on the screen. So we're going to send another gift anyway next week. But if anybody who's on the call wants to chip in, then I think you can scan this code thing here. Can you see that?
So if you've got a phone, you can put your camera on, scan the QR. Is it just onto the camera? Is that right, Fiona? You're going to need to direct us here. Get the camera up and just scan it.
Yeah, so if you were to take your phone now and hold up the camera element to it, you just want to hold it on that QR code, which is the square thing with the heart in the middle, and you see it will say open in your browser, and it will take you through to our dedicated donor box funding page. So people can donate directly via there if they wish to.
So if that's something that, you know, you want to do, feel free to do that now. We'll leave it up for another few seconds, and I think we're going to put that up again at the end, aren't we, of the call?
Yeah, and what I'll do is I'll actually put a link to it in the chat as well, in case anybody wants it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona, that's great. Shane, did you have any questions or reflections for either Ags or for Matt?
I love it. It's great. It feels good to be a part of something concrete. Like you all said, I think we all want to do something, and you know, we can't, none of us can do everything, but all of us can do something. So these really concrete ways of being able to respond, especially to such a daunting crisis as what's happening in Ukraine, is awesome, you know. And yeah, I keep thinking of the words of Mother Teresa when she said, we're not called to do great things, but small things with great love. And what's important is not how much we do, but how much love and intentionality we can put into giving it. and you know, enough of those small things with great love can actually move the world. And so it's wonderful to see an example of that right now.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing us back to that quote. I think, you know, it can be so easy to feel overwhelmed with everything that's going on in the world right now, can't it? And, you know, one of my little prayers or requests to God, to the universe, is, Lord, show me what's mine to do here, and help me to do that with love. And that's you know, that's what we've seen expressed in some of these stories, and in that example of the creativity of the fundraiser. And I did just want to come back to you, actually, Matt, if that's okay, because if there's people who are involved here in common change groups, and there's a kind of similar, bigger, like, let's say, global, or, you know, maybe even national needs that someone sees, what, and they're wanting to take some initiative around that, potentially involve common change, what would be the way of doing that? Would that be to get in touch with Fiona or with yourself, or?
Yeah, so the nice thing about us now having Fiona bringing a bit of capacity is, you know, I chair the Common Change UK board, and I've been doing that as a volunteer for a few years now, but I've always had very limited capacity to make things happen, and so Fiona's just a real blessing in that respect. So yeah, so she's uncovered all sorts of ways that we can essentially help our groups to do more good stuff. And one of those ways is to, you know, groups tend to have a core of members, maybe, you know, between half dozen and a dozen members, and, you know, who are giving regularly, so the pot is constantly kind of being replenished. But we now have this way, you know, the way we just did with the QR code on the screen, we can set up special sort of additional funding pages for your group if you've got, you know, like something that's a little bit bigger than just your pot can cope with, and you want to invite maybe a slightly wider circle of people to be part of that. So they may not be your kind of permanent group members, but they're probably just your wider circle of friends and family. So, you know, that dozen people in that group, between them, might know, you know, several dozen close friends who want to jump in on the action because it's a particularly, you know, it's a larger need, or it's something that's of greater significance. And so, yes, Fiona's there to help to manage anything like that. And Fiona, maybe you could put your email address in the chat box as well. She's very good at that sort of thing.
Yeah.
She discovered the other day as well, let me tell you this, that she sometimes sends emails to people and she got a response saying, "Oh, are you real? I thought you were a robot." So, because, you know, you get all these auto spam emails these days, and they're really convincing, and they like sound like they're from a human, but they're not. But trust me, Fiona is a human. She's real. So yeah, you can email her and get a real response.
I can vouch for that. She's my neighbour. So we've got a good amount of time now for some questions. I know that you've been fielding those, Fiona. I haven't sort of been keeping much of an eye on the chat, so I wonder if you've got someone lined up to ask a question, either to any of our speakers or to Shane. I think you're on mute. I think you're on mute, Fiona. Just unmute yourself so we can hear you.
There you go. Sorry, can you hear me now?
We can.
So we have, I believe, Kate Osborne. Matt, are you able to find her? Kate, would you like to ask your question directly?
Yeah,
let's see.
So yeah, I guess it was a question around, I felt like quite a few of the examples, although probably, I've forgotten the name now, whose was it? One of the example, Phil's, I think, possibly began to touch on this, but I feel like lots of the need that I currently see are people who are in kind of chronic poverty, so they can't afford to put food on the table for their children, and it's a choice between food or the heating. And just whether they're examples or whether there's a role for kind of common change to help with that. Like I'm always, when I hear, you know, the Bible verse from Acts that Shane talked about at the start, that they shared everything they had and there were no needy amongst them. And definitely in the UK, we are heading into a huge, like a crazy situation where people are going to be in chronic poverty and the numbers aren't going to add up. And so how do those of us whose income does mean we have slightly excess, like, can we be then pooling our income to make ends meet for those where the numbers don't add up? And are there examples of that working? Yeah, I think that's the heart of the question.
Such a great question, Kat, and I'm curious, is that to anyone, is there anyone you want to put that to in particular, or just a sort of general reflection?
No, anyone who has wisdom into it, I'm grateful to hear from.
Matt, I could potentially help with that question, if you're okay for me to chat. Hey. So one of the new features, obviously, that Matt highlighted is our fundraising page. But one of the benefits of the fundraising page is that it actually helps groups to create their own identity and kind of almost form a little bit of individuality around what they want to address in their community. So when groups form, they have the option now to actually create themselves a dedicated funding page. So when needs like yours arise, where you find that you've got families that are going to need a little bit of regular maintenance, but your fund maybe doesn't have the resources to do that on a regular basis, you can actually have your fundraising page and you can share that out on a regular basis and say that we have a number of people in our community that are needing regular support. If you can spare £2 a month and make a regular donation, that's going to be going towards the families that we support in the area. But that can be used on many different levels. You can use it for individual campaigns. So on my OT Hive Community Fund, we have a dedicated campaign for our local community gardens. At the moment, it's constantly in need of repair because we've got, unfortunately, a little vandalism problem. and so we've got it as a regular campaign that we share out and people donate to. And so you can have as many of those little kind of campaigns running at the same time as your actual fund page. And it's nice because when you go on and you see the fundraising page for the Poland campaign, you can brand it in a way that you like, and I can absolutely help any group to do that. So and there is a facility to make regular funds if you need to.
Could I jump in as well? Could I jump in as well?
Yes, of course.
I think I would say, well, I was really pleased that Shane drew us back to the comment from Mother Teresa about doing small things with great love. I think we're realistic at Common Change about where we sit in the grand scheme of things. We're not local government, we're not central government, we're not any of the sort of big charities. We've got quite a small turnover, and the people involved in our networks are really quite ordinary. We don't have any particularly sort of wealthy people attracted towards us. But I think we are being called to go deeper. And so for those groups that do exist, I think we want to help you to tread deeper. And if you feel you're being called to share your resources a little bit more radically, then I think my one note of caution would be, because I've done a fair bit of study around this as well. We want to help our groups to exist sustainably, so that if you just give and then implode, that's probably not going to help. But to just go deeper and to support one another, then yeah, maybe we can help that to happen. So there might be a small bunch of people that you're called to help on a regular basis, and we've seen a few examples of that. It's always been time limited. I think there's one group at the moment actually who is supporting somebody who's, quote, sort of between jobs for various reasons. But I think we have to be realistic as well about our role in the grand scheme of things. I don't know if that helps, Kat.
Yeah, I guess if I'm allowed to take it slightly, I'd be interested to hear from Phil on the example you talked about where it was kind of helping with fuel. I presume that need probably hasn't gone away. So how have you navigated that?
Oh, Phil.
Thanks for throwing it back to me, because I felt like I wanted to just jump in on that. Actually, that's a really recent need and request that we're still kind of working on at the moment. And we've actually, in that case, we're not seeking to, with our Common Change pot, give a kind of long-term solution, but we felt that our role could be in this situation to help out with an immediate need. And then my friend Elizabeth that I mentioned earlier is in contact with the family and is helping to advocate with them and get them involved with some of the other like local government support schemes that might be available. So I think that we can see the Common Change as part of a picture, and again, part of this sort of relational thing where perhaps some of the resources that we can draw on to help people are not just financial resources, but, you know, helping and supporting people to access what other support might be out there from government funding or other charitable sources. So I think sometimes, certainly the way it's felt like from our experience has been to help with kind of individual particular needs and then think about what other sources can be used to kind of draw in ongoing support. That's sort of been our perspective.
Thanks.
And I think there was an important point that was raised there by Matt, which is, you know, just in the same way that we need self-care in order not to burn out in our own lives, as the groups, it's important that they are sustainable and that we find ways of making it work, that we're able to give in a way that feels like it's manageable and is meeting the needs and is maintaining that kind of relational component. And I think, you know, Kat, I just wanted to encourage you, if you're sensing a calling in your area where you live to do something more, then do give Fiona a call. You know, she's very approachable, she's very open, and even just to bounce ideas off, because sometimes I think it's important to trust those gut instincts, those kind of sense of pulls that we get to do something a bit different. So trying to balance those things out as well. I don't know if you want to say anything to that, Shane. I see you're nodding.
Amen over here. I think, you know, when we think of common change, it doesn't have to be everything for everybody, but it does open up our imaginations, right? Of what can we do together? And then how can we partner with other groups? And so, you know, when I heard your question, Kat, I thought of a friend of mine who had an income that was far more than he needed. And he always thought that was really kind of ironic because he was doing what he loved and felt called to, but just made a lot of money doing it. And so there was another person that was a community gardener, an urban farmer creating food for the neighborhood, but there wasn't a way that they had found to subsidize that income. So he split his own income for many years, you know, to make that sustainable. And I mean, the goal for that was to eventually find a grant or, you know, a farmer's market or ways that we could make that sustainable for the long term. But there's all kinds of ways that we can share, you know, what we have, and Common Change is kind of one container for that or one way of doing it, but there's all kinds of other ways too. And there are some things, like I said, that we've seed funded, where like we've got friends in another country that the income, like the value of their money is a lot different from the value of our money. So they're able to do so much. So we kind of help fund that whole collective that's creating jobs and doing all kinds of stuff, but they might not have the resources in their own country to do that on their own. But it's all friends, like they've been over here, we've been over there. So I think there's ways that ultimately we all want the same thing, which is to really have people not be worrying every moment how they're going to make it. But I think, you know, you're right. The time is here that we need to be creative, and Common Change is one of those things that's kind of on the cutting edge of what, you know, raises the question, what could we do together? You know, how can we be as creative with sharing as the systems are with oppressing, and as credit companies are at getting you into debt? How can we creatively get people out of debt and out of the financial, you know, constraints that hold them down from flourishing? So, yeah.
I love
Laura,
that.
we do also have Anna Whitfield. I hope I've said that correctly. She wanted to add to the question from Kate Osborne. Did you still want to ask your question, Anna?
Sure, yeah, it was connected to it. So I love the humanising power of relational tithe, And I also love the idea of Christians being involved in community organising, community development. And I was just really curious in terms of the experiences of people in the Common Change community, whether or not, as a result of being part of a Common Change group, there might have been examples of somebody who had an increased curiosity or frustration and then confidence in moving from their involvement with this way of giving to entering into activism and campaigning. Not in any way replacing. I think it's beautifully defined what Common Change does, but I was just wondering if there's a natural evolution where people are like, I'm so fed up of keeping on having to give to my neighbours because they've had benefit sanctions. What's going on with universal credit? I feel like I want to, alongside this, do something in terms of activating and campaigning, lobbying. I was just interested if there's examples amongst the community of that happening alongside Common Change groups.
I might be able to. In Old Trafford, I actually found, for me personally, it was the reverse. I was involved in lots of community things, going to community meetings, trying to arrange things and meet needs in the community, and just kind of being blocked because there's too much red tape and there's too much this. And I just got so frustrated. And I think that was part of what brought me to Common Change. Aside from being aware of what they've been doing over the years, I just felt like, well, this is actually a way I can get right in at the base of the need and address it directly. So I don't know if there's any other stories by perhaps Phil or Karen, but for me personally, it was the opposite. I'm still involved in community events and everything, but I found that actually working kind of in the community sometimes with all the red tapes, there were just too many kind of barriers to achieving what we needed to do, and that's why Common Change kind of really appealed to me. Yeah.
One of my mentors, Anna, said that we've all heard the cliche, you give someone a fish, they'll eat for a day, you teach them to fish, they'll eat for the rest of their life. But my mentor said there's another piece of the puzzle, which is asking who owns the pond and who polluted the pond and who built the fence up around the pond and why does a fishing license cost so much, because there's a lot of people that know how to fish, they just can't get access to the pond. So I think for me, this was a way that we can begin to get through all of those things that are preventing people from being able to provide for themselves. And they all go together, advocating for healthcare in our country. I mean, we cannot pay for healthcare with our collective alone. We've got a crisis around that, but meanwhile, people got a $10,000 medical bill. We're going to help carry that, and so it's not an either or. We're going to fight for the government to do more. But meanwhile, we've got friends that we don't want to see lose their house because they can't pay a medical bill.
Yeah, I think I can also speak a little bit to that from the group in Old Trafford, where we've been there's been a family who've been seeking asylum for quite some time, and they've been in this it's just anyone that's involved in that system just knows how utterly awful and dehumanizing it is. And I have personally learned a lot about that system just through one of the other members of the Common Change group who's retired and spends a lot of his time in his retirement actually supporting lots of different people seeking asylum within Manchester. And so I won't say I've got actively involved, but I think I've kind of sent the odd letter, sent some emails of encouragement and those kind of things, and become a lot more aware of some of the barriers that exist in that system. And I think, one thing to say is that relative to the States, we're still pretty young with Common Change over here. I can't remember when it was set up. Shane, do you know? But, given that we've sort of not lost 2 years, but it sort of feels a bit like that, this weird COVID vacuum that we've had.
Yeah, that's what I was interested in. I just wondered how connected things might become over time. Once you've had an issue humanized through a neighbor, through somebody in your Common Change group, might that, for some people, be an instigator to wanting to learn more, to be more informed, to start that power analysis, to get more critically engaged, to get righteously angry. That might lead to some activism. And alongside the ways that you facilitate people involved in common change, what else might be around that might help equip us for those of us for whom this, flicks our switch, makes our eyes, get excited? What other skills might we need? There's Citizens UK, we've got a chapter in Manchester. There's some other alongside us organisations, and I just think there's a lack of confidence. I think a lot of people have had Fiona's experience, and understandably just want to find an outlet where they feel like they are making some change. But if all of us do that, the systemic stuff isn't going to shift at all, because we haven't got as much confidence on a structural level as I think we have on an individual level. And I love both. I think it has to be not either or. So yeah, I'm just thinking about how we can continue to support one another and equip each other and resource each other for the different range of skills and experiences that might be needed in response to loving our neighbour.
Yeah, Matt, did you want to speak to that?
Just going to jump in, because I think the one thing that I can say, just observing from my vantage point as having seen a number of groups form in the last few years, I think the groups definitely do go on a journey of, as you say, Anna, becoming more confident. We know there's a hump to get over when you first form a group. But I saw a survey a year or two ago now. It was done between Lloyds Bank and the YouGov polling people, and it was to do with taboo subjects. And they discovered that people like to talk about money even less than they like to talk about politics or religion. It's like the one thing people don't want to talk to one another about, and that bleeds over into our giving habits as well. And so there's kind of, as space opens up to talk to one another about, what, I'm seeing needs, what, I'm feeling moved, what, I'm feeling called deeper. I think it's just healthy to be able to have those conversations with other people instead of having it as an internal dialogue. And then we can affirm that, and we can prompt that, and we can say, well, do something about it, or try this, or let's do it together. And I think if we can create groups that have got that kind of vibe to them, then we're doing something right.
And can I just chip in something here as well, which I think has been one of my favourite parts of being part of the local Common Change group, which is the generosity dinners. We haven't done them for a few years for obvious reasons, but those that I've attended have been so life-giving, and it's where the kind of question that you're asking, Anna, that would be the perfect sort of question to bring around the dinner table at one of those generosity dinners where we bring people together. And it's not just about pooling our finances, it's about building those relationships, and Shane said it so beautifully. It's about getting really creative about what's possible when we come together. How can we be as clever as the oppressors, I think you said, or cleverer in the way that we respond to need, both individual and structurally. So, that kind of question feels like it needs some sitting down over a meal and chewing over and conversation, and how can we really work on this together for those that want to, and some may not have the capacity either. So, okay, I think we've got time for one more question. Have you got a question for us, Fiona, from someone?
Yes, I believe we have a Deirdre Barker who would like to ask a question. Are you there?
I am. Hello. It's nice to be here. I'm in Ireland. I'm in a place called Wexford, which is in the sunny southeast, although it's still wetter than most of England. But I didn't know about Common Change until I came onto this Zoom, but I affiliate with Red Letter Christians and sort of connect with them in the UK through Ash Barker. I belong to a couple of groups here in Wexford, which kind of feel like they may be kind of Common Change groups. And I suppose what I wanted to say is they don't come out of a Christian motive. They're people in the community who just were felt the need, but that's not to say God wasn't speaking through them. The first's called Wexford People Helping People, and it basically is a crisis response group, and people chip in whatever they've got and respond to crises in the community. Quite a big committee look after the funds that are just coming in all the time through a variety of sources. But for me, I give monthly through my bank because I feel that I can do that. So they also advocate for people who need help very often, you know, in going to the council for housing and that kind of thing. They started by creating a community Christmas dinner for anybody who was on their own in a community centre. That's how they began, and it just grew and grew and grew. So that's one group. But the other group, which I like the ethos and the way this group works, is it's a Facebook group, and you can put up anything that you want to give away, and anybody in the group can claim on a first come, first served basis and make your own arrangements about how it's collected and what have you. Or you can ask for anything, so that if the washing machine breaks down, I would feel absolutely, you know, free to put up a notice and say, washing machine's broken down, can anybody help out? But that's more like recycling and reusing things rather than money. And then there's actually another group who just ask questions. Does anybody know somebody who does this? Does anybody know a plumber? Can anybody recommend somebody to fix a computer? Yeah. That kind of stuff.
That's such a great example of the way that,
yeah,
you know, a group that's set up for one thing becomes, it just evolves and becomes so creative, doesn't it? And it really does sound like the group that you're describing is very, very aligned with Common Change. And I think what I would want to say is, you know, whilst Common Change has a Christian foundation to it, anyone can set up a Common Change group. You don't need to be a professed Christian. You know, anyone for whom the values of this resonates can speak to Fiona, set up a group. You know, if this is resonating for you, and I mean, it sounds like you've already got something in place, and you know, that's great. You might not need it in your area if you've already got this other thing in place.
Well, I definitely think we do need it in my area. I do, because I'll tell you why. A couple of 100 yards down the road from where I live is a traveller camp, and I regard them as my neighbours. So I do a lot of things, you know, filling out forms and going with them to meetings or whatever, where they just want some support, because there's huge prejudice here in this country against the travellers.
Well, Deirdre,
so I can see how a Common Change group might actually help our traveller neighbours. So I will try and follow through on that. Fantastic.
Thank you so much for sharing. You know, do get in touch with Fiona. She's so approachable and she loves to help people set up groups. That's her job. So thank you so much to all of you who've just asked questions. I think, you know, we could go on all evening, and it's the longest day of the year for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, isn't it? So when you finish this, you've still got a few hours of daylight to go and water your garden or your allotment, or just go out for a walk if you want to. But I just want to extend a really big thank you to Shane as our special guest for joining us. Thanks to all of our speakers, to Karen, Rob, Fiona, Phil, Matt and Ags, and to all of those of you who asked questions. We are so honoured and grateful that you chose to spend a couple of hours of your evening with us here. I just want, just before you go, If there's anyone here who is thinking about setting up a Common Change group, or maybe you're already part of one and it's just got too big and you're thinking actually that Fiona model of starting up another one in the area might be the way to go, please do reach out to Fiona. If you want to donate to the fundraiser, we're going to put up that page that we put up during that section at the end of the call. It'll be up there for 5 minutes, so please do get that. I think am I right, Fiona, there'll be an email coming out?
Yeah, I will send out a follow-up email just thanking everyone and giving them my direct contact details again, and the link again. But they will be, I have put them in the chat facility here, so if you want to check there as well. But otherwise, don't worry, I'll send you a follow-up email.
Thank you. Have I missed anything else practically, Fiona?
I don't think so. I think we've hit the mark, and we're just a few minutes ahead of schedule.
Well, thank you. I know what I was going to ask. Shane, I wanted to just ask Shane, if people want to find out more about some of the stuff you're involved with Red Letter Christians, those who, you know, many people may have come across that already, how can they get in touch with you? What's the best way to do that? And maybe you could just tell us that and offer us any final thoughts, closing comments. That would be great.
Thanks, Laura. Well, this has been a rich time together, and I'm grateful just to have been a little part of it. So I'm on social media, on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and so is Red Letter Christians. But if you're not familiar, we've also got an entire UK collective that folks have been mentioning a little bit. So there's a lot happening in the UK, but for folks in other parts of the world too, there's this beautiful little movement. We say that Red Letter Christians is a web of subversive friends that love Jesus and love justice. We're conspiring together to try to do things just like Common Change, really concrete stuff together. So we have a whole part of our website that's co-conspirators, and Common Change is one of those. So these worlds intersect and overlap. And I want to say, you know, as a Christian, I don't assume all of us are, and certainly not all of the recipients of the generosity and gifts of Common Change are Christians. But it became clear to me that, you know, the scripture says faith without works is dead. And one of the things that has happened in our world is we have Christians that are saying a whole lot with their mouths and bumper stickers and t-shirts and religious tracts that they give out, but there's not always the concrete action and the real tangible ways that we can show love and compassion. And Common Change has become one of those, right? I always think there's that delicate dance between when Jesus says, when you give, don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing. Do it in secret. And on the other hand, it says, do your good deeds so that people praise your Father in heaven. And so Common Change is almost a way that I've learned to navigate that, where we can give, where we don't need any, you know, hype for ourselves, but we can bear witness that there is a God who loves you and there's a community who's got your back. And we will walk with you, whether you share our faith or not. We will walk with you, and hopefully more and more people can actually feel the goodness of God's love through the kind of community that Common Change is. So thanks so much for being a part of all of it.
Thank you, and thank you for those inspiring words to round us off this evening. You know, we need that encouragement and that inspiration, and to all those that shared their stories as well. It's been so fantastic to be together. Thank you so much. I don't care.